I'm not new to the subject. In fact, I dropped out of seminary and taking a class on covenant theology, which is essentially the opposite view of dispensationalism. When they came and said, we want you to write a paper, I don't know, 20, 30 page paper, whatever, on covenant theology, expositing Jeremiah 31 in its Old Testament context, and then Hebrews 8, which cites Jeremiah, in its New Testament context. And I wasn't ready to have my views formed on covenant theology yet. It shows you one of the drawbacks of seminary, really one of the drawbacks of education. You kind of force-fed these things, but they take time. Nobody's going to sit down in a semester and iron out their covenant theology. If they do, it's wrong. There's no way. You're just going to be a second-hander. You're going to regurgitate what was taught to you in this class. I would never be a proponent of that. You know, think for yourself. God has a way of teaching us over time. It may take years to iron out someone's position on covenants, someone's position on Israel, someone's position on the church. And you got to let it unfold. Sometimes it's slow. So that forced me out of seminary, but not before I wrote a paper in one of my classes on the history and origins of dispensationalism. So I was studying under Dr. Sam Waldron, Covenant Baptist Theological Seminary, and in one of his historical theology classes, we had to write a paper on the time period. So kind of the modern church period, you know, late 1800, 1900 time frame, in that ballpark. I think it cuts off probably around the 1950s or so. So I wrote a paper on the origins and history of dispensationalism, which was far exceeded the page limit that I was allotted. And in fact, I could have written another 20 pages because every resource that I found all have the same starting point, and they all have the same conclusions. And when you read them, you realize you guys are all just regurgitating the same old. And what I found is nothing pops up out of nowhere. In other words, dispensationalism just didn't pop up into the mind of Darby one day, and he formulates this stuff, and now you have a new position on Israel. No, it was happening over time. And I'm trying to write, some of this wood is wet. I'm trying to write an addition to that paper that discusses really the origins of dispensationalism as a result of cultural views that were taking place at the time. And this really goes back to the French Revolution. The reason why I would trace it there, although there are some views on Israel that were happening prior to that, 1500 or so, the primary thrust of dispensationalism, and if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. You can look it up, find a brief definition. It's essentially that God's dealt with man through dispensations or periods of time, and each one of those is different. Mainly 7 different periods of time in history that he's dealt with man. Never the same. But the sine qua non of their position is a distinction between church and Israel. So the reason why I go back to the French Revolution is because it's at that period you have a shift from postmillennial, that is, that Christ is going to rule and reign on the earth for 1,000 years, or for eternity after his 1,000-year reign, which is going on now. And there's a shift towards premillennial, meaning Christ is going to return prior to his 1,000-year reign. And what happened is because of Napoleon, everybody started panicking and thinking he was the Antichrist. And so this optimism that was kind of circling the globe, really, the progress of humanity from the Industrial Revolution, which ties into what we're talking about on the main channel, of course, started getting people's hopes up. But then you had the French Revolution comes in, roughly the same time period, and you see a so-called dictator on the world stage and think it's the Antichrist, and now everybody's panicking and thinking Jesus is going to come back any day now. So that's dispensationalism. I'll maybe if I can get that book finished. No one's covered it from that angle. They just haven't. They always regurgitate and say dispensationalism started from Darby, and don't get me wrong, he had a big hand in it, but he's got a big major influence on him, and that's Edward Irving. Nobody talks about Irving. Irving really starts to put this stuff into view, and in fact, Irving's also the father of charismatic movement, which as I'm talking here, just occurred to me, what you've got in society today, in politics today, especially in this country. I already mentioned it before, the rise of the political gospel, but it's joining in with the prosperity gospel, which is mostly charismatic. So Trump's own influences, while they're promoting the political gospel, they're influenced by prosperity gospel, what some people have called the New Apostolic Reformation, NAR. That particular segment, theological segment, has its roots in Edward Irving. So it's fascinating that we have come full circle. What Irving kind of kicked off for us in his views of both charismatic, Pentecostal-like teachings combined with more political leanings, particularly with respect to Israel. We've come full circle back to that again today. So, if I get around to it, I'll get that paper, what's really going to amount to a book done on dispensationalism, the history of it.